हेलो फ्रेंड्स। तो आज का टॉपिक है हम लोग का डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट, जो इग्नो का BPAG 171 कोर्स कोड है। ठीक है। तो इसमें हम लोग का डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट का प्री डिजास्टर जो होता है वो प्रिपेयर्डनेस होता है, फिर ड्यूरिंग डिजास्टर रेस्पॉन्स, फिर पोस्ट डिजास्टर रिकवरी। ठीक है। तो ये 3 स्टेज है डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट का। तो इसी के बारे में हम लोग आज पढ़ेंगे। तो इसमें आपका 3 गो ब्लॉक है, ब्लॉक 1, ब्लॉक 2, ब्लॉक 3, ब्लॉक 4, 4 ब्लॉक है। ठीक है। टोटल आपका सब्जेक्ट है 15 यूनिट से टोटल। यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं ब्लॉक 1 में 4 यूनिट है। पहला यूनिट मीनिंग एंड क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ डिजास्टर, हजार रिस्क एंड वल्नरेबिलिटी। फिर यूनिट 3 में नेचुरल एंड मैन मेड डिजास्टर। फिर यूनिट 4 में डिजास्टर प्रोफाइल ऑफ इंडिया। फिर ब्लॉक 2 में डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट कॉन्सेप्ट एंड इंस्टीट्यूशनल फ्रेमवर्क। फिर डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट एक्ट, पॉलिसी एंड इंस्टीट्यूशनल अरेंजमेंट्स। डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट cycle with focus on preparedness, prevention and mitigation, disaster relief and response, damage assessment, rehabilitation, reconstruction and recovery. Block 3 में interrelationship between disaster developments, climate change, disaster and development. Block 4 में disaster management, cross-cutting issues, relevance of indigenous knowledge, community-based disaster management strategies, disaster management case studies. ओके। सो ये आपका कोर्स कंटेंट टोटल इंट्रोडक्शन में मीनिंग एंड क्लासिफिकेशन जो हम बताया अभी। ओके। सो इसमें हम लोग पढ़ेंगे जैसे दिया है इंट्रोडक्शन। डिजास्टर नेचुरल और ह्यूमन इंड्यूस्ड is an unwelcome guest and leaves a permanent impression on its visit on the victims. Disaster play havoc with the lives of peoples. They cause excessive losses to the humanity and infrastructure. Due to disaster, the normal life is thrown out of gear and the existing patterns of regulatory and development administration suffers heavily. The economic, social and psychological dimensions of the wrath of disasters adversely affect the environment around. Frequency as well as intensity of natural disaster are increasingly globally, including India. Disaster impact are felt more in developing countries due to borderline economic status of the vulnerable population, which have inadequate adjustment capacity. India, with a wide range of climate and topographic conditions, is subject to various types of natural disasters like floods, cyclones, droughts, earthquakes, etc. in various degrees. Ever since disasters have been causing substantive loss to the community and the exchequer, is it not only stalls the ongoing functioning and patterns of life, but puts on hold the development action plan in the nearby future, as the fund earmarked for such development is diverted to disaster relief and response. There are elements at risk with regard to each disaster. Risk is not an inherent property of the hazard alone. The weak structure are more at risk. It depends on the fury of the disaster as well as the vulnerability of the affected region. Thus, the local communities are required to be prepared to face the aftermath of the disaster effectively. The first step in this direction is to undertake vulnerability analysis, which brings to light the elements at risk such as the population, buildings, and infrastructure. The most vulnerable members of the community are the expectants and lacting women, single women, children, old, disabled, handicapped, sick, and alien peoples. Their needs have to be kept in view while making the analysis. Likewise, the physical vulnerability elements have to be recognized by the community for the purpose of initiating specific measures to reduce the extent of losses in their regions. The community should also identify potential threats in order to cope with the intensity of future disaster. Okay, so human vulnerability to disaster is a age-old phenomenon. Besides nature's warmth, human interventions have also precipitated many calamities in the recent past. People face the most debilitating consequences in the form of economic and social disruption caused by disaster. The aftermath of disasters is a grim picture of death, destruction, and suffering. The long history of disaster and the suffering caused as a result is reason enough to ponder over the questions of their management. The scope of disaster management is quite vast and could be understood through the two subdivisions. There are theoretical foundation and practical concerns. Theoretical foundation includes elements and facts like planning, organizing, staffing, directing and coordinating, reporting and budgeting. The practical concerns of the scope of disaster management include subject matter of issue or issue specific, namely administration, agriculture, education, food, health, livelihood, livestock, reconstruction, recovery, rehabilitation, relief, rescue, shelter, etc. It also comprises human element, touch upon psychological, social, and economic dimensions. Furthermore, close two-way relationship between disaster and development reveals the development orientations of disasters. In all practical terms, the scope of disaster management is much detailed and comprehensive and calls for the set of symmetric approaches to appropriate deal with disaster. Disaster management is not only a post-disaster management activity, but is a detailed and proactive approach and exercise to be initiated and put in place at various levels with rather active cooperation of all concerned stakeholders. Gone are the days when relief. Okay, so distribution in a post-disaster scenario was the only fact of disaster management engaging serious attention. For disaster management to be effective and efficient, it is not only the government that has to play an active role, but all concerned stakeholders need to work in unison for desired results. Emphasis of late has been on sensitizing and capacitating the community as a first responder. Disaster management has evolved into a methodical approach that focus on systematic observations, their analysis to and dimension dissemination of likely events to structure inform application of resource in time. It aims to prevent avoidable loss of life and property, minimize human suffering, and expedite recovery and rehabilitation. The most crucial goal of disaster management program as of now is to take all possible measures for disaster prevention and preparedness to the extent possible besides initiating prompt measures towards effective disaster response, rehabilitation and recovery. Disaster losses can be substantially minimized and the disaster management systems can be more effective if serious efforts through research, documentation, knowledge sharing, networking, etc. in the area of disaster management are carried out and the same supplement the initiatives undertaken by the laid down structures in India. Disaster management education seeks to provide understanding of different types of hazards, disaster management techniques, and impediments in the way of disaster reduction. It could play a crucial role in the areas of analyzing risks in disaster management, planning for contingencies, streaming warming systems, mapping disaster zones, developing database, preparing emergency response plans, reducing hazards and vulnerability, and conceiving disaster coping strategies. The course on disaster management at undergraduate level is to orient the learners about the negative aspects of the disasters and also to sensitize them with the method and techniques for effective management of disasters so that the losses arising out of disaster could either completely avoided or minimized to a substantive extent. Disaster management is nothing but, in essence, it is everything. When it is said that disaster management is nothing, it is because of the fact that various facts given attention to in disaster management are from other disciplines and professions. For example, when policies and programs for managing disasters are referred to, it is found as having been taken from political science, geographical consideration, regional planning, spatial planning, etc. Stem from geography, response to community, society, individual groups, and the like are from the field of sociology, statistical research, decision making, computation, models are from the areas of statistics and mathematics, plan formulation, macrofinance emanate from economics, ecological foundation are from the field of biology, and past practice as well as treatment to earlier disaster are from the field of history. It makes the one feel that disaster management has nothing of its own, and so it is nothing. The other side of it reveals that disaster affect the polity, society, economy, environment, development planning, administration, management, etc. And without appropriate management of disasters, each of the professions and disciplines that contribute to the management of disaster is out of place unless there are appropriate mechanism for disaster management. The disaster management is everything and is equally important and significant for all sections of the society. In keeping with the vast reach of and impact of disasters, the said course on disaster management shall be of significance to almost all disciplines of studies, may it be social science, engineering, architecture, commerce, commerce and management, health science, etc. This course comprises 4 blocks having 15 units, each covering different important facts of disaster management. Okay, so in block 1, introduction. Unit 1 is meaning and classification of disaster. It explains the meaning and classification of disasters. It brings to light the long history of disasters. It signifies that disasters have been affecting societies and had been posing problems and threats to the people and structure. The term disaster composed of two words, or bad and star. It also highlights the major impacts of disaster, namely loss of life and property, adverse impact on economy and social structure, epidemiological threats, migration, etc. There is mention of various types of disaster in the unit, wise water and climate related disasters, geographically related disasters, chemical, industrial and nuclear related disaster, accident related disaster like biological disaster. In the unit, it specifically focuses on natural disaster, namely earthquake, volcanic activity, landslide, tsunami, avalanche, flood, extreme temperature, drought. wildfire, cyclone and storm surge, and epidemics. Besides man-made disaster, namely complex emergencies, conflicts, famine, displaced population, transport accidents, and industrial accidents are highlighted in this unit. Okay, in second unit, hazards, risks, and vulnerability. Hazard, risks, and vulnerability are three most important and significant concepts in disaster management. Disaster management has undergone a change with the passage of time. It is no more a piecemeal strategy but an integrated process in order to understand disaster management through thoroughly. The unit explains the terms hazards and disaster, bring forth and the differential between the two. It further explains the term risks for the for you to better understand risk precipitation and risk identification. Detailed explanation of vulnerability and its various types shall help you better understand vulnerability and risk assessment. The concept of vulnerability covers risks of hazards and the measures of risk combined with the relative inability to cope with the resulting stress. In line with it, various factors contributing to both natural and man-made disaster have been discussed in this unit. Okay, so in unit 3, natural and man-made disaster. Disasters are seen as a consequence of inappropriately managed risks, which is a resultant of the combination of hazard and vulnerability. Natural disasters causing loss of life or property damage are naturally occurring physical phenomena, whereas man-made disasters are events that are caused by humans and occur in or close to human settlements. In order to have proper understanding of various disasters, different natural and man-made disasters have been discussed at length in this unit. For better understanding of the learners, natural disasters referred to in the unit are subdivided into four major types, namely geophysical, hydrological, climatological, and biological. Likewise, under man-made disaster, the focus of discussion is on complex emergencies and conflicts, famine, displaced population, and transport and industrial accidents. In Unit 4, disaster profile of India. India is among the world's most disaster-prone areas, and a large part of the country is exposed to natural hazards, which often turn into disaster causing loss of life and property. Disaster risks in India are further compounded by increasing vulnerabilities, contributing to a situation where disasters are seriously threaten India's economy, its population, and sustainable development. You shall be able to know about the vulnerability profile of India classified into three geographical divisions, that is Himalayas, also known as extra peninsula, Indigo, Indo-Gangetic Plains, and Peninsula. The unit provides details about major natural disasters of India, namely earthquakes, tsunami, landslides, floods, cyclones, droughts, and heat waves and cold waves. Okay, so disaster management in Block 2, concept and institutional framework. In Unit 5, disaster management, act, policy, and institutional framework. In keeping with the substantial loss of life and property caused by disaster, a need for coordinated and concerned efforts towards effective disaster management in the country was felt strongly, especially after super cyclone of Odisha in 1999 and Bhuj earthquake in 2001. This unit highlights the institutional arrangements for disaster management in India. To this effect, you shall be able to know about the Disaster Management Act 2005 as a new multidisciplinary focus on disaster prevention and risk reduction and a move away from a relief centric regime. It also highlights at length The evolution of Natural Disaster Management Authority and its major functions. It further brings to light the role of other major forces or agencies like National Executive Committee, State Disaster Management Authority (SDMA), Disaster Management Authority (DDMA), National Institute of Disaster Management (NIDM), National Disaster Response Force (NDRF). Besides role of central government and state governments and district administration, the unit also discuss one important situational arrangement like armed force, central armed police force, state police, fire service, civil defense, and home guards. Civil defense (CD) and home guards, local elected bodies, community, international cooperation, etc. It also brings to fore the aims of the National Policy on Disaster Management (NPDM) 2009 and certain features of the disaster of the National Disaster Management Plan (NDMP) 2016. Disaster management cycle with focus on preparedness, prevention, and mitigation. The focus in disaster management is more towards disaster prevention, preparedness, and mitigation. It is more rightly felt required as it not only helps in preventing a disaster or in minimizing its loss to the humanity but also saves lot of economic losses. Disaster management is a holistic process and is viewed as a cyclone comprising three stages, that is pre-disaster, during disaster and post-disaster. Each stage consists of various facts. Accordingly, the unit discuss prevention, preparedness and mitigation in pre-disaster stage, relief and response in during disaster stage, and rehabilitation, reconstruction and recovery in post-disaster stage, disaster relief and response. Disaster in most of the case occurs suddenly and unexpectedly. This causes lot much of devastation and destruction. India is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. A major disaster occurs in India almost in every 2-3 years, and about 50 million people are affected annually from this disaster, and on an annual basis around 1 million houses are damaged along with human, social, economic and other losses. The requirement is to provide relief to the victims immediately after the disaster. The unit has enabled you to know about disaster relief carried out through a number of efforts including evacuation, search and rescue SAR, search and rescue, shelter, distribution of food, water and fodder, clearance of debris, movement of injured to hospital, disposal of dead animals, sympathetic attitude towards victim, assisting rescue team, property security, information dissemination and checking of rumors, immediate damage assessment and filing of claims. It also refers to response mechanism with focus on emergency operation centers. Immediate damage assessment. Assessment is an important tool for retrospective and prospective analysis of disaster to assimilate and evaluate the extent of impact of the disaster. It is a prerequisite for effective disaster response effort. It makes an initial and preliminary on-site evaluation of damage or loss that has been caused by an accident or disaster. Through damage assessment exercise, an attempt is made to put on record the amount of degree of damage and also to put out what can be replaced, restored and salvaged. The discussion in the unit is on various elements and dimensions of damage assessment. The unit also lays emphasis on framework of damage assessment in two parts. It brings forth damage assessment plans for assessing loss and damage to various critical sectors, namely human life, housing, community infrastructure, environment, livelihood, and health, etc. Rehabilitation, reconstruction, and recovery in Unit 9. Okay, in the most disaster phase, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and recovery are important and inevitable aspects that are to be paid almost utmost care in bringing back the life of people to normalcy. This phase follows immediately after the disaster relief and response. Rehabilitation and reconstruction are the integral part of recovery, and effective rehabilitation and reconstruction ensures the resilience of the society. This unit explains the concept of rehabilitation and its types such as physical rehabilitation, social rehabilitation, economic rehabilitation, and physical psychological rehabilitation. It also analyzes the major aspects of reconstruction and gives special emphasis to the funding arrangements patterns for reconstruction, which eco- encompasses National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund, recommendation of the 14th Finance Committee, Disaster District Level Fund, Member of Parliament Local Area Development Scheme, Prime Minister National Relief Fund, and other insurance schemes. Finally, it also discusses about recovery mechanism and problem involved in recovery areas. In Unit 3, interrelationship between disaster and development. Okay, so Unit 10, climate change. In the contemporary content, climate change is a major environment and developmental problem which which has no boundary. It affects both the natural ecosystem and society directly as well as indirectly. The major response for climate changing is the human activity or towards the global atmosphere in the name of development. The impact are thus the increased frequency of extreme weather, flood, drought, sea level rise, and extreme climate variability. In this unit, the concepts such as weather, climate change, and its impact are discussed. Moreover, climate vulnerability and climate change adaptation are also explained from the learner's perspective. Disaster and developments. This unit highlights the interrelationship between disaster and development. Sometimes disaster lead to development, and likewise, development also leads to disaster. Disaster also affect development and cause loss of resource. Shifts resource to emergency response, depress the investment climate and also affects the non-formal sector. In the same way, development also increases vulnerability through dense urban settlement. Development of hazardous sites, environmental degradation, technological failures or accidents, imbalance or existing natural or social systems. This unit discusses the relationship between disaster and development and specifically focuses on the aspects such as development program and vulnerability, disaster as opportunities for development initiatives and missed development opportunities. It brings out the importance of developing infrastructure in a sustainable manner. Finally, emphasis they given to long-term job opportunities, livelihood of persons, and the statutory provisions for man- mainstreaming disaster risk reduction, disaster management, cross-cutting issues. In Unit 12, relevance and of indigenous knowledge, the successful and sustainability of risk reduction activities depends upon the involvement of local populate their knowledge, culture, and traditional practice. In this content, increasing the adaptive capacity of the communities helps in bringing back resilience and also in reducing the level of vulnerability. The adaptive capacity of community could be maximized by laying more emphasis on the traditional knowledge. This unit enables us to understand the traditional knowledge and, in line with it, discuss the indigenous knowledge and disaster risk reduction. It provides details about the indigenous knowledge and yearly warning system. Further, it also discusses the indigenous knowledge and coping strategies with special reference to cyclone, flood, and drought. Community-based disaster management. Community is the first respondent to any kind of disaster and the major stakeholders of the disaster risk reduction activities. They are the major crucial in bringing back resilience of the society. The concept of community based disaster management is about bringing together the community and involving them in the various phases of disaster management activities. This is a bottom up approach to deal with a disaster. This explains the concept of CBDM and community based risk assessment, which covers aspects such as hazard, vulnerability, risks, and capacity assessment. It highlights the principle of CBDM and brings out the differences between the traditional approach and the CBDM approach. It also focuses on the institutional framework related to CBDM and gives more emphasis on the planning measures in the pre, during, and post disaster phase. Disaster management strategy. Globally, occurrence of disaster is increasing due to extreme weather conditions, population growth, unplanned urbanization, and increasing pressure on natural resources. It proves that disaster has no boundaries and it makes setbacks on development. It was in such a context that the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction Convention was adopted worldwide in the 1990s. After that, the relief-oriented approach changed towards risk reduction approach. More emphasis was given to improving the capacities of community through various disaster risk reduction strategy. This unit thus introduced the concepts and components of disaster management strategies. It brings out various disaster management strategies at the international level, such as International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, Yakama Strategy for Disaster Reduction, Haigo Framework for Disaster Reduction, and Sendai Frameworks for Disaster Risk Reduction. It also highlights the disaster management strategies that were adopted in the Indian context in effective disaster management. Case studies. Case studies of past disaster are more important to understand a disaster and also examine the measures taken to deal with a disaster. Post disaster serves as an opportunity to learn from the experience and helps in streamlining disaster risk reduction activities. In earlier days, India has followed relief-oriented approach and it did not have proper institutional mechanism to handle disaster. The major policy changes and the institutional mechanism were created after the Odisha cyclone 1999, Gujarat earthquake in 2001, and the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2005. This unit highlights the major lesson learned from the above mentioned three major disasters besides the bringing out of the experiences of Uttarakhand floods 2013 and cyclone Phyle in 2013. Okay, so in next section we have to discuss in block 1. Okay, thank you.